Welcome to Leadership Story Talks. I'm Jerome DeRoy. I'm the CEO of Narrative and the co-host of Leadership Story Talks. And today I'm coming to you with a special episode from our archive. So this is a replay. And I really hope you're enjoying your summer and have been enjoying the way we've curated these episodes for the summer while we are out creating fresh and new content for the fall. So this is an episode which we called Live Storytelling Coaching. We had a very special guest, Anna Vafeiadou, who's from Greece and is a council, part of the general council at the WWF, World Wildlife Fund. And she came to us because she worked on her own personal story and she had a very specific need for that. And you're going to hear about that need and why she needed a personal story. And it really developed her own leadership skills and capabilities. So I hope you get a lot out of this, especially if you yourself are a leader or you are being promoted into a position of leadership. I'm sure you'll find a lot of value in this episode in terms of what Anna was able to learn and some of the explanations that we give and practical tools and skills that you'll learn from this episode. I hope you enjoy, and I hope you're enjoying your summer. Thank you so much for listening.
Leadership Story Talks, where we discuss the practices that engage, motivate, develop, retain, and attract people to businesses. We'll give you principles and tools based on real-world stories to leverage listening and storytelling to become a better leader and management professional. Leadership Story Talks is produced by Narrative, a company that focuses on personal storytelling for business.
Welcome to Leadership Story Talks. In this podcast, Julienne, Ryan, and I, Jerome DeRoy, discuss ways in which we can create more engagement in our lives, especially at work. Today, there are more people who identify as disengaged at work than there are who say that they feel engaged. We come from Narrative, which is a company that focuses on that engagement, engaging businesses and their audiences through the power of listening and storytelling, employing a 7-step method to do so. And we created this podcast to talk about engagement and storytelling and listening and all of the things that factor into an organization's life and its employees in terms of how do we exactly get people to get excited about their work and even stay at their work. And so we have been inviting guests now for a little over a year. And today we have a really special guest. Her name is Anna Vafeiadou, and she comes from Greece. And she is a certified lawyer specializing in environmental law. She was born in Athens and has lived and studied in Thessaloniki in Greece and Strasbourg in France. In December 2016, she started working at the environmental NGO WWF Greece as a legal advisor and coordinator of the voluntary legal team. Since January 2022, she's responsible for the legal sector of the organization. For Anna, nature represents both a place of serenity when she goes hiking with her friends and of combat when she advocates with her colleagues and allies for the protection of the environment. The fight for the protection of the environment cannot be separated from the fight for the protection of human rights. And that is what drives her passion as an environmental lawyer. And, you know, I'm reading this biography, and I can say for a fact that I know that all of these statements are true because Anna and I have had the pleasure of working together. Anna came to me as a result of being part of a foundation, an academy called the MAVA Academy, and she had completed that curriculum and then wanted to get further training, especially in the realm of personal and professional development, because she was being called as a leader to do more and more presentations and communications with teams, etc. And so she thought that storytelling would be a great thing to learn about. So I just wanted to give a little bit of that context and full disclosure that we know each other and have worked together, and also to welcome you really warmly. Anna, thank you so much for being here.
And that's one of the reasons I'm looking forward to this session, because you have that working relationship, and to be able to really get more detail about how that working relationship transformed Anna's work is so exciting. So thank you and welcome.
Thanks, Jules. So Anna, maybe we can hand it over to you and ask, you know, what can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your own journey with WWF, and perhaps elaborate a little on how we came to work together. What motivated you to do that?
Thank you very much, Jerome and Julienne, for this invitation. I'm really excited for this podcast. So yes, you couldn't have described it better. Thank you, Jerome. More or less, this is who I am. I'm always interested in roots, where people come from, because this is the factor that identifies them. For me, I was born in Athens in Greece, and I was raised here. And my family comes both from the central Greece, the Peloponnese, and northern Greece, Macedonia, coming from Asia Minor and the Black Sea. Since 2016, I've been working with WWF Greece, which stands for Wildlife Fund for Nature, and not World Wrestling Federation, as it's
I'm glad
sometimes...
you made that distinction.
Yes. Fortunately, after a lawsuit that was successful for the environmental organization, the trademark for the Wrestling Foundation changed to World Wrestling Entertainment. So WWF is a leading independent conservation body, and its mission is to build a future in which people live in harmony and with nature. In Greece, the national office is present since 1991, and for more than 30 years, jointly with other civil society organizations, private and public institutions, we strive to safeguard the valuable biodiversity of our country, to secure the sustainable use of natural resources, and to reduce pollution and food waste. To accomplish that, we take action both on the field, taking conservation actions, as well as on the public discourse and the political scene, doing advocacy work. So in my field, the environmental legal field, we mostly focus on advocacy work. And in our advocacy work, we have to deal with a variety of audiences. Should that be politicians, governments, private, public institutions, or the general public. Each audience speaks a different language, and we are required to address them in a different way. So during my work, I was asked more and more to conduct public speaking and address to different audiences. So the need came up for me to develop my public speaking skills. And that followed, as you said, Jerome, the completion of this Leadership Academy program, which was really a transformative experience for me. And in this transformative experience, I include as well our sessions for the storytelling process. So for me, storytelling is really precious. I have always looked up to storytellers, and my father used to be a very good one. And when our journey started with Narrative and you, Jerome, I immediately understood that this process would help me to better listen first, and then talk in a way that connects me with my audience and helps me to better engage with them.
That's great. And thanks for giving this context as well, in terms of why you were seeking storytelling, and had you ever, I'm just curious, I don't think I asked before, but had you ever thought of, I know you mentioned your father was a great storyteller, but had you ever thought of storytelling as a way to engage people in the context of your business, your role, as a leader and kind of ascending leader? Was that something that was already on your radar?
Lawyers are supposed to be storytellers. Yes. stories are made of facts, and lawyers are always interested in facts, but storytelling in the way that we discuss it now, it's rather different, because we're talking about personal storytelling, and this is completely different field, I believe. So I was not that used to personal storytelling, and it was a field that made me feel rather uncomfortable also, because it's easier to tell other people's stories than to tell yours, I believe.
Right. Yeah,
that's true.
makes sense. So I'm going to ask a question that we usually keep with we ask all of our guests the same question, but we usually keep it for a little bit later. But I'd like to ask it now, so that then we can kind of have a discussion around that. And that question is whether there's an experience, or to tell us a little bit about an experience that you've had that has shaped who you are today. And I asked that question today, again, full disclosure, because I know that it's kind of a springboard for your own story, and we'd just love to hear it.
So when I was 12, I remember reading a poem by Rudyard Kipling. I had printed it and stuck it on the door of my closet. And every time I opened it, it would make that particular grinding sound. And I would whisper those lines: if you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And which is more, you will be a man, my son. What a worship to action, isn't it? This poem accompanied me until the age of 18, when I left home to study in another city, thinking that my time has come to pass into action. Though today that is not the case. Think of Fridays for Future. Young leaders are taking action from an early age. In Thessaloniki, as soon as I started studying at the law school, I became a member of the Law Students Association and the local citizens group. Back in 2009, the economic recession was looming in Greece, and the government was planning to privatize the water supply public company of the city as part of a wave of privatizations that had already started. Examples of other countries had shown that people had been deprived of access to water supply facilities as a result of similar privatization schemes, while other countries had decided to renationalize their water supply facilities. In our local citizens group, we wanted to communicate these examples and hold a public event on the matter. So we printed a large number of leaflets that had these big letters: say no to the privatization of water. Equal access to water is a fundamental human right. Let's fight for it. And we spread out in the neighborhood to distribute them. We had small conversations with passers-by, and we heard all sorts of comments. So when I joined the WWF as a lawyer, leading a group of volunteers from different professions, we would provide consultancy to citizens and citizens groups on how to exercise their environmental rights as active members of the community. I still remember my first case. It was a man from Germany who called me to report the degradation of a wetland in an island of the Aegean Sea. He was very alarmed by some cleansings that had taken place by the municipality on the boundaries of that protected small wetland. And his instinct was right. The public works that had been realized were not in conformity with the protection status of this valuable ecosystem. Today, being a leader at the legal sector of WWF, our advocacy work, as we said, consists of shaping robust environmental legislation and policies in Greece and monitoring their implementation. we are now working on another level, different from that of the citizens. We are mostly focusing on strategic legal intervention. So for me, this pathway that I think identifies me is this process from being an active part throughout my life, an active part of the community through different roles.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And I hear that in the story, right? That sort of, there's this common thread. But I'd love to hand it over maybe to Julienne, because I don't think you've heard this story before, or maybe you've heard little bits of it, but yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts, what it evokes, and especially the comparison between that story and the biography that I used to introduce you. You know, I'm always curious about those things and what we retain more than anything else. So I can say a few words about that later, but let's have Julienne first.
Your work was literally a ripple effect of using your story and your work, Anna, and then the impression you made on other people who were in your sphere, in your company. And that example about the man reporting back to you about what he was now trying to do with the wetlands is a great example of you inspired him to take action or to notice things in a new way. So it is compelling what you were able to do.
Julienne, just to clarify that the most inspiring thing is that it was him who saw this incident. It was him who by instinct wanted to report it. He could not possibly be aware of the legislation that applied in that case. And why would that very small wetland be of importance, of conservation importance? But it was just by instinct that he thought that maybe I should inform about it someone, an organization that has an expertise on that. And they could, in turn, inform me on whether this is legal or not, this is lawful or not. Yes.
That's, yeah.
So I think it's him. It's this person who is inspiring, and
yeah,
we'll give credit to both of you for the
that's right,
for the mutual collaboration. But thank you. It is you helped people pay attention and take action. So it's amazing. So I'm going to sit back and listen for more of experiences and what you learned and what you've taught others.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say two things that kind of strike me. And again, you know, I've heard, obviously we worked on this story together, Anna and I, and then, you know, so I heard at the end of our sessions, various versions that we worked on. And then you told that story to a group of people, which I had the opportunity to see as well. So I kind of see how it evolved. And now it's the third time that I'm hearing it, you know, yet another version. And even though it's the same story, you know, there are things that the mind sort of notice that are different every time. And I think to me, this is just kind of reinforces the beauty of personal storytelling in a kind of business setting, is that you notice these things, even if you've heard the story before, there's something a little different every time. And what struck me, the two things that struck me this time were, one, your comment, Julienne, kind of building on that, the juxtaposition of Anna is the one at Thessaloniki, she's in the streets and she's got her leaflets and, you know, no to the privatization of water. We all deserve equal access to water. You're the one who's the activist. And then you go to this organization, WWF, and now there's someone who's calling you, and he's the activist. He's the one who's like, we got to do something about this. Except that now you're in the position to actually do something that could really matter to that person, that could actually, you have the tools and the skills and the training to go and do that. And so that's the first time I really noticed that contrast, or that evolution of your journey, you know, from even the little girl, you know, in her bedroom who's kind of dreaming, to then taking action in university, right? Thessaloniki was in university. And then finally you're there in the working world and at the environmental organization that's known all over the world. It's probably one of the most famous environmental organizations. And, you know, when we use those terms, people know what we're talking about, WWF. And so then we kind of get to see that whole journey in, what was that, 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes, you know? And so to me, that's the first thing that struck me, is just the evolution. And the second is comparing it to the bio that I read at the beginning, which is great. It's a great bio, but it's very different the way it lands. You know, now I feel like I will remember those moments that you described, you know, and will remember that hero, you know, who called and said there's a problem with the wetlands here. And so I think it's there's two different ways of speaking, of communicating. And I think this kind of shows to me the difference between storytelling and, you know, something that's kind of more what we do every day. You know, it's different, and it's and to me it's very impactful. So I wonder, from your point of view, and now that I don't know how many times you've told this story by this point, but what is it like for you to be telling this story a few times? Do you notice changes? Do you notice differences with different audiences? Because you said at the beginning that one of your motivations to do this kind of training is that you had to speak to different audiences in different languages and different, you know. So I'm curious what you see now, having gone through that, going forward, in terms of these different audiences that you deal with. Have you already noticed something about that and this training, and whether it's been helpful around that?
I totally agree with you, Jerome. Starting from your first point about changing perspectives, I'm not sure if you use this word, but to me it's that when each time we revisit some events, some stories, personal stories, we focus on different details, and this might change the whole story and the whole meaning of the story. And that was something that I had the chance to understand from an early stage, because I haven't shared with so many people this story. It's only the third time now. So what I always have in mind is the two questions you were constantly posing: why story and why now? And these are fundamental questions, because with respect to our audience, we will have to think whether we need a story. And if the answer is yes, then we will have to think of why now, what type of story is needed, our needs as a speaker, and of course the audience's needs. Another point I would like to point out, and I think Jules will also have a valuable input on that, is the effect it had. In the previous sharing of this story, I shared it with an audience that I hadn't met before, and I think the impact it was that it created this sense of intimacy in a really quick way, because we would be together only for 1 hour, so we would have to build this connection really fast, so as that we could make the best of our time together. So intimacy, because when you share something personal, the walls are falling down, and it also creates a sense of legitimacy to your audience, because they think they can get closer to you. They can, in turn, ask questions or share their own stories, which for me, it's really valuable.
It's memorable because I'm carrying a picture of a marsh in my mind as you were describing. So I'm traveling with you in this story and looking at this body of water and the environment, what it could look like. So it becomes more tangible, I think, is the most powerful part, and more memorable. And I think that's the beauty of the act of storytelling, and what you said before about choosing when to introduce that, and keeping in mind who's sitting with us and what we want to do to invite them in to listen and experience what we experienced.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that because that image that you now carry with you, Jules, of the marsh and the water, and it really, I have a similar visual, and I also have that very strong visual of Anna herself, in that protest and sort of when she was in university and trying to stop something, which I just realized was also about water, right? And so, it's sort of, there's something very poetic about that. And you don't really need to tell us how far between, how many years passed. I think you only told us once how old you were when you were in your room, right, at 12, and then you leave when you're 18 or something like that. And but we don't really need to know all those kind of details of it was this year or it was that year, or is it, but because we make these connections around the visuals, and that's really interesting, and that's what we carry with us. So yeah, my mother lives in Florida, and opposite a wetland that kind of sounds a little bit like that. There's a marsh and there's birds and all of that. And in Florida, we're always talking about, well, when will the house be covered in, because it's not, we know that it's not going to last, unfortunately. Right. But we talk about these environmental issues in a way that's very kind of day to day. I look at the marsh and I wonder, what's this going to be like in 50 years, 20 years, 25 years? Will there even be houses here? And so suddenly you make a connection with, I wonder if I can do anything about that, and then here we are with you on this podcast, and here's someone who actually has some of those tools, as a lawyer, as an activist, and as part of this, global NGO that is trying to have an impact on climate change and all the things that we want to be fighting for. But I wonder, from your perspective, so that's what it evokes, right? And I wonder, Anna, if you're sort of thinking about what's next. You tell a story like that, and you mentioned the group that you were telling it to before. It causes a conversation. What do you think is next? Like, what's your ideal kind of outcome? And I know it's kind of a new thing. It's only the third time that you've told this story, but even in general with your work and telling stories about the environment and about, our human rights, as you mentioned, what we can do legally to try to affect change. What ultimately is your kind of ideal outcome when you're telling a story like that? Is it that you're trying to change a mindset? Is it more about getting people to understand what they can do? What is it exactly? Maybe you can tell us much more eloquently than I'm struggling to do.
No, you expressed it perfectly. We are all aware of the bad news regarding the state of the environment, the radical loss of the biodiversity, the climate deregulation. And in the same time, we are all aware that the environment is our home. We are totally interconnected, and our health is also closely interconnected with its state. So this is our starting point. This is our common understanding and common starting point. But what's next? This is the call to action next, because we have to do something about it. And by we mean everyone, because there is no room for exclusions. We all need to act. And there are ways to do it. What you said is true. We have the tools. The legislative framework gives us the tools. The protection of the environment as a substantive way and through procedural ways has been identified in an international level. We have the right to a clean environment, clean and healthy environment. And this has also been recognized as a human right, which is very important also. But as a lawyer, of course, I am also interested in the procedures, because we are not interested in theory. Of course, having a right, having secured the declaration of a right to the environment, it's really valuable. But we also need the important framework to be enforced so that this right can be enacted. And we also have these procedural rights. We have the 3 pillars of the environmental democracy, as we usually say. It's the right to environmental information. It's the right to public participation in environmental decision-making. And it's right to access in environmental matters. In my story, the man who reported to an environmental NGO this event of degradation did not only stop there. He had a follow-up with the competent authorities. And this is a valuable example of public participation. So informing the relevant authorities of a case of degradation so that they will do this follow-up and take the appropriate actions. This is being active. This is taking initiatives and being an active member of the community for the protection of the environment, because he understood the connection also with his own well-being.
It's really interesting because, you know, we think of all these. I know that I've sort of, this has kind of opened my eyes a little bit to environmental issues, and I probably, you know, I certainly think of myself as someone who's pretty aware. I mean, I make sure to recycle. I make sure that we're not using plastic straws and all that stuff. You know, all the things that you kind of see as a citizen of the United States, and, you know, living in a city, you notice those things everywhere. You know, the last 20 years have changed quite a bit in terms of how aware we are of our environment, for those who choose to be. But this has taught me something else, and what you just said reinforced it, is that there are rights that we have to the home that we live in. Just like I have rights over my house and the roof over my heads, and, you know, I own it, it's my property, and I have rights around it. Well, you know, it's kind of interesting to think about the man in your story and what he noticed as a degradation of the environment, and he was relating to it, just like, as you said, as his home. And that's an interesting thing. I mean, not that it's completely new for me, but the idea that then, because of that mindset, that causes that person to see maybe there's somebody who can help, because this is all our home. But there's something quite concrete. It's not so, you know, I think we can hear that quite often, that we all live in the same home and we should all be careful. Well, actually, there are things very concrete that you can do, and there are people with a legal background, such as yourself, in organizations such as WWF, that can actually affect change through those legal tools. And that's not something that I necessarily associate with the environment and sort of climate change and the fight for, you know, making changes around that. You know, you think much more, at least for me, about people in the streets protesting, you know, during big events. But we don't necessarily think of the people who are taking those calls looking at the law and regulations and seeing what's possible within that, and then which competent authorities can do something about it. And it's not some special organization that does all that. It's actually people in your community. It's the police, it's the mayor, it's the, whatever that is. And that really, I think that opened my mind a little bit around that, because it's not necessarily something I was looking at through that lens. And I think I hope that for our listeners, it's also a mind opener, that that maybe one of the calls to action for our listeners is go to the website of your local WWF or some other organization where you can maybe do something if you've noticed something.
The word that came to mind when I was listening to you both is collective. So the agency isn't some big thing that's going to solve it. It requires us to think as a collective, to take action, to be aware in what we're doing and what we can do to contribute, not just with dollars, but with actions on a daily basis.
The other thing I'm curious about, Anna, is you mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation that lawyers are supposed to be storytellers.
Yes.
And and that personal and then you so that was the first point. The second point was personal stories are very different. And then you proceeded to tell us a personal story from, that started when you were 12 years old. And I wonder, in terms of what you learned in the process of coming up with this story and crafting it and then sharing it, what is different in terms of that kind of lawyer's training where you do have to speak and communicate very clearly? So I'm assuming that is part of your training. But what's different between that and what we did in terms of the kind of communication that personal stories sort of require? Are you able to sort of see what that difference is? I'm curious about that.
The starting point are the facts. We agree on that. But what a lawyer is required to do, especially in jurisdictions at administrative courts, which is usually the case in environmental matters, but not only this jurisdiction. We also have civil law that applies in penal law, but it's mostly administrative courts that will have to deal with this type of environmental matters. Legal practitioners are requested to exhibit the facts, exhibit the relevant rules that apply in the case, and develop the legal argumentation that will combine those two. In the end, the judicial system, the judges will be interested in this legal argumentation. Facts are always important, but you are not necessarily requested to be a good storyteller so as to win the case. What you taught me, what we had this chance to go through in this process of storytelling, is being more open and being more personal. And what was really challenging for me as a question was your story, meaning the one and only story, because I don't think that there is only one, because we are really complex personalities. We all have more stories to tell. And as we said before, this always depends. We have to be flexible and with respect to who we have before us. So more stories to tell, and this is the beauty. And all of us have stories to tell, which are important in different contexts and in a differentiated way. So for me, these seem like two different worlds, but probably someone else would give another answer. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to respond, actually, because you're right. I think at the beginning, when I asked you the question about the experience that's shaped who you are today, that's a question we ask all of our guests, and it's always a different answer, obviously, because they're unique. And yet there are these universal paths or pathways that people have taken that actually aren't so different. They're unique in your circumstances because this is you in Greece at this age. But, there are other people who've told us stories about experiences that shaped who they are today. And my mind, and I think our listeners' minds and everybody's mind, as they listen to those stories, they make connections with their own lives and their own experiences. And to me, that's really, when we talk about facts and data and, making sure that we stay true to a person's experience that you're representing, as a lawyer, and you tell a story of your own, it changes how you connect with someone on a brain level. I mean, we are designed as human beings to respond to stories, and that happened again today, because even though I have nothing, I'm not trained in the law. I'm not. I don't really have a career in environmental law, anything to do with the environment, really. And yet, the journey of someone who goes from, being 12 years old to reading an inspiring poem to then taking that to university and then the job you're in now, I can relate to that journey because I've had that journey. I was a child inspired by something, had a dream, went to college, then did other things, and now I'm doing what I do, right? So there's something when you take out those unique circumstances, my mind is making those connections with my own life. And I think that's why it's so powerful and why we connect so much to these personal stories as opposed to stories that aren't personal, that are more, something about something else or someone else. Jules, you seemed like you were about to say something.
So you mentioned about stories and lawyers, and there's always a reaction when we hear the label lawyer. We have a picture in our head, and your act of storytelling humanizes the relationship with your practice and your mission and the work you're doing. So it does disrupt thinking and allows people to pay attention with fresh ears, basically, I call them, fresh way of listening, and go, that's what informs her work. And I think that's very important to give people you've given people opportunity to hear about you, as well as the mission and where people can have a relationship with this work.
Yeah. Maybe that's actually a great transition to the next question as we begin to land this plane. What is it that you would like for our listeners to retain from today's conversation? Where can they learn more? Whether it's about the Leadership Development Program or WWF, are there any resources that you would like to point people to, or a message to our listeners?
I would like to highlight the word that Jules used, saying collective, and the importance of collective action is really significant, because in my story, I had this man who was at the center of the story, but usually, in order for an action to last, because taking action in the environmental field requires both a lot of time, a lot of effort, personal effort, and a lot of time to see results. If you seek actual results in the environment as well as in our everyday lives, whatever we do, each fight will not come from one day to another. So the importance of collective action now arises in our discussion, because one person cannot take all this responsibility in his own hands. And it's very important to look up and search for other people, other citizens who are also interested in these matters. Taking action also is important to be done in an informed and well-documented way. This is the key to bring a change and improve the living conditions as we said, we all have the right and the means to rethink and co-design a different future, where people and nature will thrive together. The question, after all, is, are you willing, as citizens of democratic societies, to join this journey? As further resources, of course, your audiences, your listeners are more than welcome to visit the WWF website. And I think another valuable reading would also be the link for the leadership program done from the MAVA Foundation.
Great. Thank you so much. And what a great call to action. Or the question is, are you willing to join us? And that word collective that Jules brought up. I want to reiterate the ways that people can find out more. WWF, the website, there's MAVA, MAVA Foundation, if you want to learn more about that program as well, and just get a little more context. And then, of course, as always, there's narrative.com, NARATIV.com. There is a podcast page on our website where you can find all of our previous episodes, and that's where you'll find this one. And of course, if you have not subscribed to the podcast on your favorite platform, make sure to do so, because when you do that, every Monday, you'll get the new episode, and that way you don't miss any of our episodes. So I want to thank again Jules, my wonderful co-host.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, and thank you, Anna Vafeiadou, for being with us today. Really wonderful work that you're doing with WWF, important work, and I'm so glad that we were able to give you a new skill that you're going to be, I'm excited to see you use more and more in the world to greater and greater effect. Please stay in touch with us and let us know how it goes. Maybe there'll be a part 2 for this in a little bit further down the road. And I want to remind our listeners as well that we are here to listen to you. Whenever you need to tell a story and want to learn how to find, craft, and tell the stories that matter, that will call people into action, just like Anna did today, please don't hesitate. We are happy to listen to you and to whatever challenges you have. So narrative.com again, NARATIV.com. That's where you'll find us. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you next time.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narrative.com.